Hello. Well, so we're here for the unscripted mental health conversation. Right now we have Ripley. We'll see how long she stays. She's not usually a lap kitty, but it's very cold, and so she's more using me for warmth than anything else. Yeah, so we're having an unscripted mental health conversation, and feel free to go in the chat and talk about any questions you might have about mental health. Otherwise, I'll just kind of chat about my mental health perspectives. I was going to say mental health issues. Hopefully, I don't have a lot of mental health issues still. But I am a therapist, and yeah, so nothing that you share here can be used against you in a court of law. Well, actually, that might not be true. Anything can be. It's not confidential, so we can't guarantee anonymity. I might not. I try not to call out like the chats of like who saying what. Every once in a while, I do, but I try not to do that, just to try to keep it anonymous. So far, it looks like I'm not a technology guy, but it looks like people that like later log in can't see the chat, but maybe that'll change. I've actually preferred if they can, so they know like what questions I'm trying to respond to, but I kind of try to read the questions anyway. Anyway, right now we don't have anyone in the chat, so that's okay. We'll just talk about mental health and see how it goes. So I'm going to start by just talking about Ripley here, my little adventure cat, since she's guest starring in our unscripted mental health conversation right now. So Ripley was found in a bush, not by me, but then she very quickly came in the care of myself. And originally it was supposed to be temporary, waiting for her to get a good home, but she stayed a little too long, and I fell a little too in love with her. She always did the shoulder thing. So, like how you might see her hike on my shoulders, she did that when she was a little kitten. She would like love to be on people's shoulders. So, she would go on everybody's shoulder back then. But she wasn't always an adventure cat. She actually was just an indoor cat, just a normal run of the mill indoor cat. I had two cats, Ellie and Ripley. Ripley was a little less, more skittish, a little less comfortable around strangers than Ellie. Ellie became the kind of the therapy cat, and we would have group therapy at my house, and she would just like know whoever was struggling, and so she would just kind of know to put her paw on it. Like they wouldn't even say anything. She just sensed that there was somebody who's going through something, and she'd put her paw on their lap. And every single time, this is the other cat, Ellie, who passed away, um, they would just start crying because she just sensed the energy. There's something about that energy that she sensed. Anyway, all that to say, Ripley was not that cat. She's very friendly. She always been very friendly, and I knew that she, had a little bit more of a warrior. She's a little princess. She is a she, so she's like my little Xena princess warrior. And I knew that there was a part of her that desired to explore more. When Ellie passed away, I would bring Ripley back home. I should probably say first, I introduced both of them to the van. So I do a lot of traveling in my van and slowly introduce them to the van. And first, I just had one at a time, them get comfortable with me there in the van. And then eventually I would introduce them both there at the time. And then finally we started traveling, but we went really slow. And the reason I'm mentioning all this is because it all has equivalent to therapy and how we build those connections and trust. And that's with relationship with others, but also relationship with ourselves. Progressive, but very slow. And every step of the way, I was kind of seeing if Ripley looked like she was uneasy or Ellie looked like they were uneasy. If it was mild, and this is, of course, just my best sense, unfortunately, they can't use their words. But if it was mild, then I would be like, okay, like, let's just keep it at this level and see how they do. And if it was more intense, then it was like, okay, we need to step back and slow down a little bit. So they were already really accustomed to the van, and we would explore, all three of us, and do different trips and vacations and stuff like that. Anyway, long story short, when Ellie passed away, whenever I brought Ripley back in the house, she would be looking for Ellie. Ripley would be looking for Ellie, and she'd like look everywhere, and then she would hide like under furniture and stuff. And that's not like Ripley. Ripley doesn't usually hide. She's on top of furniture, not underneath it. So I knew that something was wrong, and I think that she was just grieving. So I didn't want to leave her alone, and I didn't want her to be in the house a lot because that seemed to be where she thought she'd see Ellie and then get sad. So I decided to take her on to hikes, and it started just where like I put her in my backpack and figured, well, I might as well like leave the backpack open in case she wants to like peek her head out. And she not only peeked her head out, but she jumped right on my shoulder, and it was just so photogenic. And so first I just started taking pictures, and then it was like, oh, this is a great opportunity for video. And so I started singing musicals like any normal human being would do when they have a cat on their shoulder. They'd start singing musicals. So I started singing musical. I think it was Pirates of Penzance, for those of you who know, and just singing to Ripley and filming it. And then I just started talking about mental health because that's kind of what I do. And so more and more, I started doing little videos about mental health, and I was like, oh, this is an idea, because I knew I want to do something more mental health focused on social media, and I hadn't really decided what yet. I still haven't fully decided yet, except for the R&R shorts that I know, okay, this is something that I want to keep doing because I enjoy it, and it seems like there's at least some people that really get something out of it. But anyway, so I started doing little clips of that, and then it just kind of progressed, and I naturally thought of the name of Ripley and Richard, R and R, R&R mental health. Oh, that works, rest and relaxation. So we started doing little videos, and I started taking her on more and more adventures, and everything was an experiment because I had never really looked into what it was like exploring or adventuring with a cat. So we'd go on these like hiking trips, and it was like, okay, what can she handle? What can't? The main reason that I keep the harness on her is there's a couple times that she'll get scared and she'll hide somewhere that this hasn't happened a long time, but it was like under rocks. It just would be really hard to get her if it wasn't having the leash there, and it would take a long time. So it was just safer for her and easier to harness her, but she never runs away. Her safety zones are threefold: this house, the van, and then the carrier. And each of those I reinforced first, so with rewards and operant conditioning kind of thing, which I can right there say mental health wise, part of that is again working slow, working with yourself and others, but also knowing what your safe zones are. So even when it comes to like mental health with like visualization stuff, I do a lot of visualization exercises with clients that like that. Not all clients like visualization, but we start with a place of peace. We start with focusing on where we're safe. Unless you can get to a place where you can basically regulate yourself, right? And de-stress and relax, it's really hard to dive into certain things that you're processing. So when you're in acute trauma, you're heightened already, and it's just like, how can we get ourselves calm? But when you're not in acute trauma and you're having all this stuff that needs to be processed, it can feel counterproductive because it's like, oh man. I mean, I remember when I first went to therapy as a client and feeling like, dude, I'm exhausted every single time I step out of therapy. This is hard. It's processing stuff that's really exhausting, and some of it emotional and draining. And so I'm feeling more and more drained as I go to therapy. Now, it was helping me. I think that there could have been some things that would have made therapy better. So I'm not saying I had a bad therapist, but there was definitely some things that I learned later would have been a lot easier and better. And so all that to say, if you're secure, you start there, you're safe there. And that's even what we try to do as therapists, is build that rapport to help you feel safe, that then we can go into the difficult stuff that's draining. and then hopefully come back into the stuff that's calm. And so one of my meditation visualization exercises, we do that. But with Ripley, it's location based. So first she's safe at the house. That kind of happened naturally. Then I built that tradition to be safe in the van, to make sure that she felt comfortable, that she was pet a lot there, that she got treats there, that she was able to map it out. And I don't know if you've seen, whenever cats in a new location, first they hide if they're feeling really unsafe. Then they explore because they're curious and they want to map out all the territory. And, as a cat dad, I'm very non-reinforcing of Ripley. Like, she can do what she wants. She left, right? She can do what she wants. I don't tell her what to do. I don't try to get her to do certain things most of the time. Because what I basically want is her to just feel safe. And then we just kind of, so she can trust me. So when I'm taking her somewhere that she doesn't know, she knows that she's going to be okay. So then she's safe in the van. Then I had her feel safe in the carrier. And then we started taking the carrier on different adventures and stuff like that. Okay, what are your thoughts on utilizing EMDR to help address moral injury? So EMDR, for those of you who don't know, is this rapid eye movement desensitization and reprocessing tool. And it's actually probably the go-to standard for moral injury. Now, for those of you who don't know moral injury is when you have something that broke your values that you did that had huge negative consequences. What's interesting is the severity of the moral injury is not dependent on how much it broke your values, but how big the consequences are. So in other words, even if it was a small break of your values, but a huge consequence, it's really hard to get over it. Very triggering, but like tough example from a book on moral injury. I think the child lived and was seriously injured, but this guy got angry and drove off in anger and ended up hitting his son with the car accidentally, but he had broken his values from the anger, and then the injury was a significant one. So huge to deal with, even though how often have we gotten angry and stormed off and nothing significant happened? Part of the reason why I mention that is because if you're ruminating on a moral injury that you've been ruminating on for a long time and you're really struggling with it, it's not because what you did was so horrible. It's because your brain is stuck on this. If this hadn't happened, that wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have done that, typically. There's a lot of different moral injury workbooks and processes you can go through too. But yeah, I mean, EMDR is a good one to kind of go back to that place if you're able to, and then reprocess it. And I know someone who's good at EMDR and could go through that with you if you wanted to work with them on that experience. Do you have any specific questions about that? And what that process looks like? I think that you could do a lot of different visualization meditations on that thing. But to be able to offer yourself energetic forgiveness is going to be the main key. And one of the things I like to listen, I like to learn music. I've always been from a musical family. And often when you're playing music, you make a mistake. And if you're playing live, that's one thing, you just go on. But if you're practicing, what they tell you to do is actually to stop, make a mental note of the mistake. Now, it's not beat yourself up. It's just be like, oh, okay, I made a mistake. And then to practice it the right way. And so when you've done like a moral injury, this is not about the moral injury. It's about the ruminating on it. If you ever find yourself getting into the negative space about that moral injury, note it. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just acknowledge, oh, that was not what I'm trying to do. And then practice slowly the right way to do it multiple times. And really put in your reps there of like processing and thinking through what's the right way to handle it. So you said, I've tried it in the past, but it was virtually, and I honestly don't think it helped. I'm thinking perhaps I should try it in person and said, yeah, sometimes that can help. Um, Also, like, I don't think of EMDR as a magic bullet. I think that there's a lot of active imaginations, visualization methods that are very powerful, that are a little bit more free form than EMDR, um, that you can really start to engage using symbols that connect with you. And so basically, the whole thing about cognitive behavioral therapy is that at a certain point, we realize in studying human behavior that the stuff that was going on in our mind was just as important as the stuff that happened to our body. In fact, virtually there's no difference. So, in other words, if you visualize, what's up, buddy? Good morning. Where are you that it's morning? You're the beautiful man, though. And many hearts back to you. Thanks for joining the chat, my big YouTuber brother. But anyway, smash that like button if you love Richard. Thanks for that shout out as much as I do. That's nobody loves me as much as you do. Anyway, to be able to have symbols that really resonate with you, that are like your symbols, and then visualize that stuff, the more you can practice that energy matters. So, like, it is virtually the same chemically to our brain seeing somebody hug us in our minds and embrace us and love us and just soaking in that as it is getting a hug. Like, it's almost exactly the same chemically. And it's the scary part is that's the same as work for the negative. So in other words, like, you could go through anxious, fear-driven, like, terrible stuff again and again in our minds, and it's just as draining as our body as it happening. So if you're like dreading what if on some scenario, or beating yourself up about some mistake of the past, that is taxing on your system to the same level as it happening again and again, if that makes sense. So all that to say is, go back to that practicing that good energy, practicing that right thought process again and again every time. The other thing is, just to give you some hope on that, because I know you've been struggling for it for a while. I had done this workbook that was like going through these exercises, and then I used the same workbook, I want to say 3 or 4 years later. And I was shocked at how much of the stuff I still struggled with. Like, everything on that workbook, I was like, this is still me. And I was like, I really thought I'd grown more than that. But all that to say, none of that stuff is true of me today. So, like, or maybe some stuff is a little true, but most of it isn't at all. Growth, the way it works a lot for a lot of things, is kind of like, oh man, I don't like that it's flipped backwards in my, but whatever. Okay. So you go like this and you're like, I mean, it's really like this, honestly, but you're going for this long time and you're not even sure. It's like, sometimes you even feel like you're lower than when you started. You put all this effort, and finally you start to go up and up and up and up. And then there is a point where it's diminishing return on investment, where you're still going up, but it goes slower. So all that to say is, you don't know which things in life you've been struggling with for a really long time and kind of going like this, that you're just going to get all of a sudden to this point where it gets higher and higher. Oh, by the way, Richie, you missed Ripley. She was here in the beginning of the video. I dread what if scenarios in my head daily, and yet sometimes I find it gives me fuel to keep going. Okay, so this is that's actually a really good insight. So one of the things I do with clients when we work on negative thoughts, and this is actually a good thing for you and that spiral. So the workbook I was referring to, I'm going to bounce a little bit. The workbook I was referring to was actually the 12-step workbook, but I have a workbook for moral injury if you want to look at it. And it's an ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, on moral injury. And you could look that up. If you look up acceptance and commitment therapy moral injury workbook, I'm pretty sure there's probably only just one, and you'll see it. But anyway, I can show you the one to make sure it's the right one sometime. So, like, whether it's your moral injury that you're ruminating on or dread scenarios that you daily put in your head, one way to process that I find very helpful with clients is to say, what is the healthy part of this? What is the helpful part of it? And what part of you wants to hold on to this? Because even the most negative seeming thoughts, right? Like, I am a failure, right? Which is one of my intrusive thoughts, has a possible helpful benefit. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's helpful overall. Overall, those negative thoughts are usually more negative. Yeah, nice shirt. Yeah, I was given this shirt for Christmas. It's a, Jesus birthday Christmas gag sweatshirt. But anyway, it might not be Christmas anymore, but it still feels cold. So all that to say, back to what's the healthy part of you, even if it's not a helpful comment overall, right? Even if it's your self-critic and it's really negative and you need to change it, sometimes the easiest way to change it is acknowledging that healthy part, because then you can highlight that. So for instance, if the dread scenarios are motivating, thinking about intentionally, even journaling, what is the helpful part of that? What is the part that's fueling me? And is there a way to do it without the dread? Is there a way to do it from a positive thing? So, like, for me, as somebody who's very self-growth dedicated, now I'm not saying I master this and I'm good all the time, but at my best, when I'm doing things in the healthiest way, I can be content, enjoy where I'm at, and committed to continue to be better. And like that energy, I find to be way more efficient and way more healthy than oh, you're not good enough. If you don't do this, this is going to happen. Like all of that negative energy stuff that, while it has some helpful benefit, typically overall drains me more than it helps me. So looking at, and then going even the part of you, right? And where does this part of you come from? So, like, for instance, self-critics often comes from a parent, and we hear that parent's voice. You can't stop now. That's all you're gonna do. It's like, come on. How many of us had parents that were our wrestling coach? All of us, right? No, just me. Actually, I will share with you guys a funny little story. So I'm coaching this wrestling program, and there's this little girl who's struggling, and I'm walking in the hall. She's there and she's like crying, and I'm like, looks like you're having a rough day. What's going on? And she's like, not much. My dad and I had a little argument or something like that. I don't remember exactly the words she said. She's a young girl. But I was like, yeah, I heard that. And she's like, yeah, it's not easy having your dad as your wrestling coach, because her dad is one of the coaches. And it was like one of these moments of like, oh, life has prepared me for this moment. Like my entire life has been building up to this conversation. And then she goes, yeah, my dad gets angry sometimes. And I'm like, oh, again, you have no idea how prepared I am for this conversation, little girl. Because my dad was a wrestling coach and he used to get angry sometimes. And sometimes he'd get angry at moments that he shouldn't be. And my dad is actually helping out of the program. So she knows my dad and she knows how good I get along with my dad. So I was able to share with her about like how well we get along now, but also how difficult it was getting through that process and how hard he was on me when I was younger, or at least how that felt to me, or how it felt like he was always being hard on me. And so I end up having my brother pass in the hall. And I said to my brother, Hey, John Peter, that's it, my brother. I said, how often did I cry in practice back when I was a kid? He goes, I think you cried like every day. And I was like, okay, fair. And then, how often did Dad yell at me? He goes, he yelled at you a lot. And I was like, okay. And how often was he proud of me? And he goes, he was always proud of you. And it was perfect answers. I knew he was going to answer that way because she just needed to know that he was proud of her dad was proud of her. And sure enough, my dad was always proud of me and, always loved me. And he just, get in that coach mentality and, it's navigating a lot of different interests. And I was a very sensitive kid. All that to say, for me, that inner voice could be sometimes that dad. And it's kind of ironic because now my dad, who I'm best friends with, is the one who's telling me, hey, you're being too hard on yourself. You need to calm down. You're trying to do too much. And I make this joke that it's like, well, that's not what my wrestling coach used to say, which was him. I was like, my wrestling coach used to say, you got to put in more effort. You got to try harder, just keep going, and he was a national champion wrestling coach. And you're just some old guy, which is just being silly because it's the same guy, but he's learned a lot. He's grown, he's in a different spot and a healthier spot now. All that to say, it doesn't really matter. This is another thing that I try to talk about all the time. It's not really about what happened to us. It's about how it felt and the stories that we end up developing. And so then we develop these little parts of ourselves that have these little scripts. And so when we look at these voices that we don't like about ourselves, whether it's beating yourself up because of a moral injury, whether it's dreading scenarios over and over again, it's like, where did those energies come from? What is that part of me? And here's the real key. Instead of going, how can I change that part of me? It's like almost like, how can I give that part of me a hug? How can I embrace that part of me? How can I love that part of me in a way that it's safe enough to calm down? So when you have an alarm clock go off, right, you got to give it some attention to get it to turn off. If you're just trying to shove it away, it's still going to go off, loudly in the background and stop you from feeling peace. And so just like pain in the body is an alarm signal, it's trying to tell you, hey, you need to give some attention. And if you couldn't feel physical pain, you would not have a superpower. We think maybe that, but there are people that can't feel pain, and it's not a healthy thing. They get injured all the time. Pain is a helpful thing to experience physically. And emotionally, it's the same pattern. When you're feeling pain emotionally about certain things, it's your body trying to tell you, or your mind trying to tell you, we need some attention here. Now, there's different reasons why you might get stuck in those moments, but acknowledging first and foremost that the reason why I'm feeling certain pains is because my body or my mind is trying to get me to pay attention to something and to do something about it is such a big key. Instead of trying to go, I need to shut down this pain, or I need to adjust so I don't feel this pain. There are times that we adjust the circumstances, but it's kind of actually, I don't want to say last case scenario, but it shouldn't be our immediate of like, oh, I'm feeling emotionally difficult, I need to change my circumstances. We should first kind of go, okay, where is this coming from? And how can I adjust internally? Can I adjust internally? Oh, I can adjust internally. Oh, it is one person that's negatively influencing me over and over. Okay, maybe I need a boundary. And, I'm preaching to myself here more than anyone when I say, like, trying to not shift like a pendulum from one end to the other, but just slowly adjust. So if you're just ruminating too much, slowly adjust. Dreading too much, slowly adjust, micro adjustments, because there's parts of you that are in these things that might be attached to things that you really care about. Does that all make sense? Hopefully it does. Keep going in the chats. Give me good questions, okay? I just keep chatting about stuff until I get more questions often. Um, yeah, this therapy journey is interesting. I had something I mentioned earlier today that I think is a really good thing to be reminded in this process. I thought of it because a friend of mine who I could just see was pretty heavy in terms of emotionally. He had a lot of heavy energy when I saw him. And I love this guy, and I mentioned to him that it's important. He's a singer, and it's important to remember that there's this kind of paradox when it comes to working on yourself. So if you're a singer and you're trying to become a better singer, the more you train your ear to know when you're in tune, the more you're going to notice how often you're out of tune. And so naturally, the more critical you become of your own voice. It's part of the growth process. So you got to be kind to yourself while you do that, because you can feel like you're getting worse when you're actually getting better because you're noticing more and more of your mistakes. When you first start singing, you're like, oh, I'm like Mariah Carey. Look at those vibrations, I'm singing amazing. And then as your ear tunes, you're like, oh my gosh, I made so many mistakes in that last song. But that is actually growth. And the same thing is true of ourselves. When we're working on our internal self, you start to notice more and more of your tendencies, where your ego shows up, where you're struggling, what you could have said better, things that you still need to work on. I mean, at this point, there's the one thing that I have from all of my therapy is that's the hard part. I try to at least rephrase the criticism. Yeah, and that's all that sometimes we need to do is just kind of like, can we reframe this in a little bit of a healthier way? Right? Just tweaking it. But like looking at myself, there are some things that I have. I mean, I have so many therapy tools now because I've done this from going to therapy to starting to study therapy to getting my master's degree in therapy to practicing therapy. There's a lot of tools that I have a lot of experience with, which can feel almost honestly like a superpower sometimes, where I have all these like super helpful tools to deal with stuff. So that's the cool part. That's the part that like makes me feel really good and really strong. But the other side of it is I'm way more aware of all the issues that I have to work on. 5 years ago, I thought I was a very healthy person mentally and emotionally. And I am a significantly more mentally healthy person today than I was 5 years ago. That's objectively true. I'm sure of that, right? But I'm way more aware of all the things about me that are not healthy. I'm way more aware of my tendencies and when I do things that I shouldn't do and are pitfalls and different things that I have to watch out for, or when I do think that, ooh, that wasn't really the best. And so being generous to myself is so important. Being positive about myself is so important because I'm noticing all of the areas. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I have a more negative view of myself. Like I said, I'm objectively more healthy, but the little mechanics of my behavior, I notice a lot more of where I can tweak it. Does that make sense? It's worth it to me. I think it's objectively worth it. One of the things that's really fun about these therapy tools is that even if it doesn't turn out to like you've got the best life ever, you still feel super happy and self fulfilled because you're happy with yourself. And the reverse is tragic. There's nothing more sad and depressing when you see yourself get all the gold that you wanted, all the goals that you wanted, and still feel empty inside, like it's not enough. And that's to me, that's the saddest thing to me when I see people that are clearly still unfulfilled and unsatisfied. They don't like themselves. They don't like their life. and they have all these accomplishments. They've done all these great things. It's really sad to watch. What would be your advice for a loved one with the addiction with addiction who appears to be sober recently, but they're in a relationship with someone who's still in that life? I'm such a big fan of agency, so I think it's so important to be able to have a sense of agency with what you do. So yeah, one of our recovery guys just typed in "live and let live." Um, so there's a reason why when I started my therapy practice, I called it True North, because I don't have a roadmap. Sure, I have opinions on what's the best thing to do with so many things. I really just have a compass. I want to make sure that people are coming through to true to I can't talk today. I want to see people going northbound. And they might be drifting a lot of west, and they might be drifting a lot of east, and they might be running into some mountains and some rivers, but hopefully they're still heading north. All right. True north, because it's the opposite of the dirty south. Amen to that. Preach, brother. So all that to say, which I know all too well, he says, that what I would focus on more in the positive instead of this relationship that is, yes, objectively a liability, very likely, if especially she doesn't start or he doesn't. I don't remember. Did you say which one's which? If they don't jump into the sober lifestyle, but it's not the first priority. The first priority is them investing in a community that is sober, right? So investing in a community that surrounds them. And I will say this, I've never seen someone long-term be successful in sobriety without some form of community that is focused and supportive of that sobriety. Doesn't have to be the same thing. It's not like everyone needs AA as an example, but everybody needs a community that's surrounding them, supporting them in sobriety. So if you would focus on encouraging them in that, and then as they grow into that, they might end up feeling that this relationship isn't compatible with them. And I've seen that happen a lot. But if they want to hold on to that relationship, you really, who are you to stop it? You can't. I mean, even if it was good to. So if stress and anxiety is so close to excitement, what are your good insight already? What are your tips to steer towards excitement and move forward instead of getting stuck? So that's you're kind of like right there already, and that's one of the things that when people are nervous or anxious, it's not really helpful to try to get them to calm down. It's working against the nervous system at that point. And the reality is the purpose and meaning are positively correlated with anxiety and stress. So in other words, it's really hard to have a very purposeful, meaningful life that doesn't come with some anxiety and stress. Now, they're not it's not causality, it's not completely linked. There are things that you can do to improve purpose without increasing anxiety. We can go into those nuances if you have questions about that. But to answer your question directly, I would say that it's leaning into focusing on the purpose of the stress and the anxiety. So it's like, why are you so stressed and you're anxious? You are stressed and you're anxious probably because you care, probably because there's a purpose. What exactly is my purpose in that process helps you to focus on the thing that you can actually control, that is actually your part in it. And that's the thing that you can get excited about. The other thing is some encouragement, and you can be your self cheerleader, right? To be able to say, look, I know my part. So when it comes to stakes, the greater the stakes, the higher the performance when there's competency. But when there's a lack of competency, the higher the stakes, the worse the performance. So like it's in sports, if you were trying to hit if I was trying to hit a baseball and there was one person watching, I would have far more likely, or nobody watching, let's say, I'd have far more likelihood of success than if 1,000 people are watching, because I'm not a baseball player and I don't know how to hit a baseball. But if a professional baseball player had the same scenario, it would be the opposite. They'd be far more likely and perform better the more people that are watching, because they have competency. So all that to say is, if you can give yourself the confidence and lean into your competency in that issue, you will be more excited and less stressed and nervous. Someone recently tried to apologize for the relapse. I'm really sorry you had to see me like that. I responded with CPR. I am honored that you would. And I think you got cut off there. Embarrassed by that means how much you care. Would be embarrassed. Yeah. So, like, yeah, that's a good, it's like we used to do with crying, or we still do with crying. Like, if somebody apologizes for crying, somebody once said, in this group, we can't apologize. It's like, oh, no, no, that's definitely not true. Apologies are great. It's good to apologize. We just don't apologize for crying, because crying is a gift. It shows trust. It shows vulnerability. It's courageous. So you cry around us, we want to positively condition that. And we find that a lot of people have been made to feel like their tears are some kind of an inconvenience for other people rather than an honor. And actually, I just was given back a copy of my favorite book, Dune, which talks about, of course, it's because it's a desert culture, but like when they shed water, it's like, oh, they're giving their water to the tribe. They dedicate their water to the tribe. It's this great honor. And that's always kind of stuck with me. And that's how I genuinely feel when somebody cries around me. I can tell you, I do not remember. I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure it was like years ago, but I do not remember the last time that someone cried around me and I thought, oh, really? Oh, this again, or whatever. Every single time somebody cries around me, I'm like, what an honor, what a gift. Oh, this is a precious moment. Oh, they're talking about something real. Okay, this is something that matters and they care. Okay, now I'm even more engaged and I'm more present. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah, I mean, and also, I talked about my dad a little bit earlier, and I think he's on the forum somewhere. But anyway, love is seeing people as they are, not as you would have them. And when you really love someone, I even remember. Okay, this is true of my dad. It's definitely true of my dad, right? Like I don't. I'm going to give three very different examples here. Okay, so one of my dad is like, do I want him to be the best version of himself? Yes, but that isn't going to be not a quirky guy. Like I don't want him to like not put his foot in his mouth sometimes, right? Because it's funny, it's part of what, like there's some inner healing child stuff that I hope that he, completely doesn't have to deal with anymore. But that's not really him. That's just some wounds. And sure, that discernment is sometimes murky. But I was thinking about like my cat who passed away, of like even the things about her that were quirky and sometimes difficult to deal with. It's like it was part of who she was. I loved that. That's what love is. Love is not, I would love this person if they were the perfect reflection of what I want them to be. Love is, I totally accept who they are. And that actually ends up leading to transformation more than the reverse. And that's the biggest trap. You want to see relationships that get stuck? Relationships that get stuck are when people think, oh, if only my partner was willing to do this, this, and this, they would be great. When it's like, I love my partner and this is my third one. So there's this movie called An Ideal Husband, and it's a great movie on lots of levels. But there's this one part, I'm not gonna give away much about it, but like where there's this dad who's talking about all that is wrong with his son. And the woman that loves his son says, oh, I love all his bad qualities. I wouldn't have him part with a single one of them. And the dad says, "You don't deserve her, son." It's like the son's like, "Yep, I definitely don't deserve it." That's not exactly the line, but uh, ironically, right, paradoxically, as Carl Rogers talks about, Carl Rogers is a psychologist who created the most common popular form of psychology to this day. His most famous quote is, "When I accept the things about myself that I don't like, they paradoxically and automatically start to change." Now, he said that line multiple different ways at different times. So you might see a quote a little different, but the concept is the same. Acceptance leads to transformation. Being able to go, I totally accept you. I totally embrace accepting your partners, right? Accepting your friend. I mean, even with this, someone was asking about this person in recovery. And it's interesting. Sometimes even my friends in recovery will get stuck on this. If I accepted myself the way that I was, I wouldn't be doing all this drugs and alcohol. And it's like, yeah, no, you stuck in that addiction were actually in a constant divided state where you didn't accept yourself. And that's why in AA they do that whole I am so and so an alcoholic, because that's actually what acceptance looks like. I accept that I'm an alcoholic. Oh, no, now I don't have to do it. Right? So acceptance actually leads to transformation. I'm trying to support someone that is leaving a toxic relationship. I've been listening a lot, limiting my advice and giving it to God. What else can I do? Have you tried bondage? I've heard it can be very helpful in limiting people and what they do. Building up that internal mechanism of who the person is the biggest thing. So like the mission number one. So the emotional root of someone in being a toxic relationship is what? Now, this is going to vary a little bit from person and situation to situation. It probably comes from a childhood wound. Like 90% of the time, it's a wound from one of their parents, and 90% of the time, it's a wound from the same sexual gender as the person that they're in the relationship with. Okay? So, like, if we want to put on our analyst hat, right, in terms of analyst trick 101 to make people think that you're psychic, is observe them in a romantic relationship that isn't healthy and make predictions on what their parent of that gender was like based on the behavior of the partner that they're with now. And you're going to be right at least 90% of the time. And they're going to be like, how did you know that my dad was that way or my mom was that way? So, okay, what do we do there? Well, it's essentially reparenting, getting that person to see that they don't have to live in that same narrative and that same script, building up that confidence that they want to change the narrative, that they believe they can be more. When I've seen people go in the process of becoming better, they often get to this point where they're like proud of themselves for the first time. And they're almost like being proud of themselves, like a parent would be proud of themselves or proud of them, right? Because they're giving themselves that parental energy that often, not always, but often they never got. I have one question. Being a mental patient and drug addict, I gave up my kids. Terrible. What's your question? That's a very tough thing to do, to give up your kids. But I'm not seeing the question yet, unless I'm not scrolling down. No, yeah, okay, there's the question. How do I get over it? You don't, you get through it. So when we go through difficult experiences, the desire is to go back, like to reclaim everything that we have. And we often can't, but we can keep moving forward. And in the future, there's this mystery. The mystery is what is going to happen next. And tomorrow is not written. Now, I don't know what that's going to be like. I'm not trying to tell you I do. But I know that it has way more potential than we can possibly imagine. I know that we underestimate or we overestimate usually what we can get done in a year. We underestimate what can happen in 5. If we're willing to, sure, let go of the past, but focus on being the best and moving forward as best we can every day, and trusting that process to have a new story. So there's like a form of therapy called logotherapy, and there's another one called post traumatic growth. And both of them are focused on driving from a purpose. And the one started with looking at people that had gone through the worst of all traumas. And the other was one forged literally in the concentration camps of Nazi Germany. And I mention that to say that these two forms of therapy were not formed from people that were like, oh, I got, tea when I ordered coffee at the coffee shop, and now I'm having a really bad day and I need somebody to help me with it. Okay, that's a silly example. But it's like it's people that experience some of the worst trauma that human beings can. It was forged in those kind of settings, and it produced life and joy. And so no matter what somebody has gone through, there are tools that can so help them to have a rich and meaningful life. And so I would say, I don't know if you were here for the whole chat because you just chimed in, but like we talked a lot earlier about the different parts of ourselves and even the negative thoughts, and like realizing what part of it is beneficial. So like the part of you that is really struggling because you gave up your kids is a good part that you don't want to be rid of, right? So holding that pain is actually compunctio, which is the holy pain. It's actually a part of being a healthy, loving human being, but that can reform into a purpose and a better version of yourself. The thing I can tell you is how long that's going to take before it doesn't sting in the same way. I'm not saying that time heals all wounds. It doesn't. It puts them into perspective, and years later, some wounds still hurt. But that hurt can come with more meaning and purpose if you lean into that new story that you're writing. So I hope that gives you at least enough to work on in that process. I can tell you a lot of people I've known and helped have been there before and changed their lives around and are living their best life now. I actually shared about a client, was it last week, that came to me because, yeah, I think it was last week I talked about this client that came to me because multiple therapists told her that it was too triggering to hear her story because it was so traumatic that they couldn't handle it. And so it was passed on to me. So I don't share anything that's shared with me in therapy, even with the anonymity of not saying who this person is. But all that to say is like their life is great now. They worked through that process. We still every once in a while check in therapy, and like we don't even talk about the trauma that has been processed through because she's over it. That part. She's got a new life, and she's in a healthy place. And it took years, but she's doing great. And her issues are now new ones. Fun, right? All right, we're getting towards the end of the hour. So, any other questions before we wrap up today? Got some real good questions at the end. One thing that I just want to mention is that please come back next at 7 o'clock. Come with your questions quick. Think of them ahead of time. Invite other people to the chat. We try to do it. We say 7 o'clock. That's Eastern time. If you're in a different time zone, everyone can master a grief, but he that has it. Much Ado About Nothing. I love that. That's one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. The movie specifically, I love. Not Keanu Reeves' best acting, but there's some other really good acting in that movie. If you ever watch Much Ado About Nothing, the original, everyone can master a grief, but he who has it. Interesting. I also just recently heard this quote from Kierkegaard that I never heard before. I'm gonna not remember exactly, but a pure heart is one that is focused on one thing, something like that. Which, man, that to me is so powerful. Having a pure heart, just focused on one thing. That's battle. Okay, so all that Eastern time zone, 7 o'clock. Bring your friends in the chat. You don't have to tell them that you're bringing them because you know that they need therapy, but saves you from having to say, a friend of mine really has this issue. And please like and share and subscribe and all those good stuffs. All right, so no more questions. I love you all. Okay, I don't have friends, only family, and those with pending applications. There you go. I like it. Cool. Well, I'm glad I'm one of the family. All right. Love you guys. I'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.